We fundamentally procrastinate on things that don't feel safe to us, but our growth is always on the other side of what feels safe. All of us deep down want love, safety, and belonging, and we will procrastinate anything that we feel could put our love, safety, or belonging at risk. I've been running the Monk Manual for 5 to 6 years now, and I've been coaching for the majority at that time with entrepreneurs who are running 7, 8-figure businesses. And most of these people come to me or the Monk Manual out of some sort of desire to be more effective with their time. As such, one of the most reoccurring patterns, right, the most reoccurring symptoms that I end up finding of areas that people want help with is this area of procrastination. Most people, if you were to ask them, hey, do you ever procrastinate, would say, yeah, I do, right? There's an awareness that there's some level of potentiality that's being put on the shelf because we procrastinate. Now, the thing is, our awareness around procrastination really is also dictated by how far along we are on our journey around our usage of time. If you're someone who is very aware of your time, is very aware of where your time goes, is very aware of maybe what your personal goals are, what your intentions are for a day, week, or month, the way procrastination is going to show up for you, or your awareness of procrastination, is you're going to see very clearly, hey, I said I was going to do this thing and I didn't do it. Or, hey, I had this goal of getting this thing done at the end of this month and that didn't happen. And then you experience that month in, month out, and then 6 months later, you're still finding yourself procrastinating and wondering what's going on? What's wrong with me? Why do I keep on falling into this pattern? So for those sorts of individuals, procrastination tends to often bring with it a feeling of shame or guilt, even sometimes self-hatred or anger. That could be anger directed at self, that could be anger directed at someone else. But this feeling of real frustration because there's a lot of clarity around, hey, here's the ideal, or here's what I'm moving towards or I want, and here's what's actually happening. And that chasm creates a tension, right? Or maybe you're not in that particular category. You tend not to set goals as much, or maybe not as aware, a little bit more fluid with how you approach your time. But even if you're someone who's not regularly, say, setting goals or intentions for a day, a week, a month, you're still probably feeling the effects of procrastination. It just manifests in a bit of a different way, right? It's a lot more subtle since there's not as concrete of an awareness around what's being procrastinated. There's just a sense of a malaise. I love the word malaise because that's the best word to really describe it. I think of malaise as, for me personally, if I eat a lot of pizza or something, right? Or I just kind of fill up. It's like going to a buffet and then the way your body feels afterwards, you just don't feel very well. You feel as if kind of like the vitality has been sucked out of you. Like you're just not thriving, right? That's the feeling that comes when we're not necessarily aware on what we're procrastinating on, but we've kind of habituated this pattern of putting things off till tomorrow, what we know we could really be engaging today. And I think Henry David Thoreau, when he says the mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation, this is in many ways what he's talking about. That feeling of malaise, that feeling of, I know that this isn't what I want. There has to be more than this. There has to be more to me than this. And when we recognize that, but we're not really able to go and gain traction around moving forward, that can create this sense of malaise. Now, the thing that's really interesting about procrastination, and I see this across the board, is people tend to think that procrastination is a personal problem, right? Naturally, there's this movement towards thinking that, okay, if I'm procrastinating, that must mean that A, I'm maybe not disciplined enough, or I'm just weak. You know, everyone else seems to get this. What's wrong with me? When people procrastinate, they tend to look at themselves and think, there's a problem here with me. There's a problem with how I'm approaching this. I just don't have the strength. It's almost like someone who's, say, going on a run with a bunch of other people and they see the other people are able to continue, but they can't. And there's a feeling of, I just don't know why I don't have the strength to be able to move forward in the ways that I'd want. This is a narrative around work, around procrastination, that's largely a self-determining narrative of discipline, that discipline, or lack of discipline rather, is what causes procrastination. But I think that's extremely misleading because procrastination is not fundamentally about discipline. Procrastination is a fear response. Procrastination is fundamentally about emotion and emotional regulation. We don't tend to procrastinate on things that we want to do. Let me give you an example. Say you're someone who likes dessert. You're probably not going to procrastinate or say, I'm procrastinating that dessert. Or if maybe it's something at work that you really enjoy doing, you tend to not procrastinate those sorts of things. What we tend to procrastinate on are the things that bring about a sense of fear or discomfort. What we procrastinate on are the things that we're afraid of. We tend not to procrastinate on things that are very known to us, that we quote unquote want to do. We tend to procrastinate on the things that scare us. Either they scare us because they're important, there feels like there's some sort of risk involved, or we procrastinate on them because they're uncomfortable. The discomfort can be really simple, right? People do procrastinate on washing the dishes or cleaning the toilet. Most people do not want to go and clean the toilet, right? Or wash dishes. It's just not the most enjoyable experience. So we can procrastinate that. But we also tend to procrastinate on the things that are really the most important things for us. It's the projects that scare us, that put us out there the most. It's the conversations that scare us, that put us out there the most, that we don't know exactly what will happen. It's the sort of things where when we engage in them, it might challenge our sense of identity. It might challenge the way that we view how the world works. You'll notice that these are the things that we tend to really procrastinate the most on. We procrastinate on them because they're really important. People will come and say, I have a real hard time focusing on the most important things. And I find myself just getting distracted in all these little things. Now, it is true that without a good system, it is easy to get distracted by a lot of these little things. But what's missed in that is there's also a very operative reason why we're constantly caught up in the urgent. And that's because the urgent can distract us from the important. It's the perfect excuse for not having to go and do the things that scare us. And I really want to drive this point home that when you notice that you're procrastinating on something, it's either because it seems like it brings some level of discomfort, or it's because you're afraid of it. The thing is, the discomfort, the items like cleaning the toilet, that doesn't really cost you all that much, right? You put that off for a week. Sure, would it be good to just get it done? Would it give you maybe a better standard of living to have a clean toilet? Or would it help to develop maybe that muscle a bit around leaning into that discomfort? Absolutely. But that costs us far, far less than how we procrastinate on the truly most important things. Let's run through some examples of what this can look like practically. What are those sorts of things that we tend to procrastinate on, those important things? Well, one could be having a really difficult conversation. It could be a difficult conversation with a spouse, with a significant other, with a child, with a parent, with a coworker, with a boss, with an employee. A lot of people don't want to have conversations like that. And sometimes people will put off having that conversation, say in a workplace setting, for such a long period of time that ultimately the role doesn't work out, or they leave the organization rather than just having the conversation that they should have had 6 months earlier. The same thing can happen in a relationship with another person. We can put off having that conversation for so long until things just get progressively worse. This is a really, really important point, right? You look at this sort of procrastination versus cleaning the toilet or washing the dishes. We're talking about two entirely different worlds in regards to how they impact us. Another example would be with creative work, work that tends to expose us in some way, puts us out there, challenges our own conceptions of who we are and what we're capable of. That might be going and, say, doing some sort of challenge like running a marathon, or that could be writing that book that you've been putting off for a long period of time. That could be going back to the workplace after raising kids. That could be finding a second vocation after retirement. There's a fear underneath everything of what will happen if I do this thing that I've never done in the past. It's much, much easier to put things like that off and have places to hide, places where you can just do the things that are safe. We fundamentally procrastinate on things that don't feel safe to us, but our growth is always on the other side of what feels safe. All of us deep down want love, safety, and belonging. And we will procrastinate anything that we feel could put our love, safety, or belonging at risk. And what makes it even more complicated for us is we have this really, really broken model for how we work as humans that comes from this modern productivity assembly line vantage point for human behavior that approaches everything through a very mechanized view of the human person. And because we look at ourselves as if we were a machine, of course, if the machine's not really working, it's the machine's fault, right? We don't see that there's human levels, that there's levels of fear, there's emotions we have, there's senses of identity we have. A machine doesn't care about love, safety, and belonging. A human being does. And this mechanized view of the human person can mislead us and get us caught in these cycles of shame around procrastination that not only keep us stuck, but like a vampire, suck a lot of the energy that we could be using to making progress on just cycling through this shame cycle. I'd argue this is why 90% of the self-help genre sounds great in theory, but doesn't actually help you because it has a total misconception of how human beings actually work. Now, I want to talk for a moment about the mechanics of procrastination because I think this is going to help you as you're engaging procrastination and trying to break these cycles to pause and redirect that same energy that currently is manifesting as fear to rather be a force of inspiration that's directing you in a very positive way towards what it is you actually want. So normally what ends up happening is you go and you have this idea of something that you want to do. And let's take for an example, maybe having a difficult conversation, because that's something that a lot of people can relate to. Most of us have moments in our life where we know that we need to go and have a conversation we'd rather not have. Relationship on some level is always going to bring with it, if we're really living with integrity to ourselves in the relationship, a certain amount of tension at points to have those difficult conversations. Maybe there's an interaction you have with another individual and you're thinking to yourself, you know what, I need to go and I need to address this particular thing. I should have this conversation. Now, what normally happens after this is we set this unclear intention to have this particular conversation, which frankly, we're probably afraid of having because again, it challenges that idea of having love, safety, and belonging, right? We're very social creatures. So if you think about having a conversation and you're not sure exactly what's going to happen, that's extremely threatening. But we set this intention to go and have a conversation. Now, what you'll end up finding, usually you'll find a million ways after that to distract yourself. You might even have other conversations with this person. You'll keep putting it off like, oh, you know what? That's not the right time. Maybe I should wait till 3 months from now because, they got this thing going on right now. And we start moving into this rationalization process, right? We start thinking about all these reasons why it makes sense to procrastinate. Our brain is trying to find rational reasons as to why we should avoid doing the thing that we're afraid of. Fundamentally, that's what's going on. We're feeling that emotion. We have this tension because part of us wants to go and do this particular action. And so our brain goes and fabricates a lot of different rationalizations. And the thing is that they're good arguments most of the time. They're not complete lies around anything, but they are misleading. And it doesn't have to be just in this confrontational situation with the conversation, right? Like you could think about writing a book, changing our particular life direction, quitting a bad habit, whatever it might be. We're afraid of what might happen. So what ends up happening is we negotiate and we distract ourselves, and we will do this for a very, very long time. Now, there's really only two resolutions that can happen when we procrastinate. Either our intention dies insofar as at a certain point, we convince ourselves we didn't actually want that thing, and that thing could even be the relationship, right? And this does happen, where people will put off having a conversation for so long, maybe it's with a manager, that they end up eventually being like, this isn't the workplace for me. Now, it all does make sense, but the reality is they could have had a conversation 6 months earlier that could have changed the whole relationship, but instead they waited too long. And then things got worse. This happens in romantic relationships as well, kid relationships. It also happens, though, with these more project-based things where we can have a particular project that we really feel like we want to do, but over time, we convince ourselves, maybe I didn't actually want to do that to begin with. It's easier for us to tell ourselves, I just never wanted that, than to admit we've been listening to the voice of fear for a really long time. That's one possible scenario. The other scenario is the pain just keeps getting worse, and eventually we decide to act. Oftentimes when we're procrastinating on something, there's some sort of energy behind that, whether it's a positive energy that's trying to move us into a new potentiality for ourselves, or if it's a pain, maybe it's a painful relationship, a painful situation. Over time, the pain of not acting does tend to increase. That's why we either need to rationalize more or at some point we will have to act. And I'm giving the example of a longer timeline, but it also can happen over a day, right? Maybe you're procrastinating a small thing, like just making a phone call or sending an email. This drama can play out in a big way. It can play out in a small way. So something that's been really helpful for me in terms of navigating procrastination and moving through it and procrastinating less is just being more aware of exactly how much procrastination is costing me. If you were running a bank and every single day you noticed certain amounts of money were missing, that would be really concerning. Now, for us, that's exactly what happens with our own potential, right? Because what we tend to be putting off is these most important things. And there is an immediate effect, not only on our current life, but also even just our experience of life. Like I was saying earlier, we experience this malaise, or we experience this shame, or we experience this anger, or whatever it is, this feeling of procrastination. It doesn't feel good because we realize that there's some sort of goodness we can be bringing to the world, and we're not. And that's a difficult feeling. But if you really want to get serious about procrastination, then it's worth being aware of not just the immediate effects, but really the compounding effects. Because the most important things do have compounding effects. You put off having a particular conversation with an individual, that relationship's probably going to get worse and worse over time. Whereas if you go and you have some of those conversations and you change the culture of the relationship, and then you have more conversations and you're able to kind of spiral upwards, what does that do for you? For many of us, the potential is enormous. The compounding effects of focusing on the most important things far transcends what we even would imagine is possible. Because success really in any domain usually comes down to choosing the most important things over the less important things time and time again. My hope here is that you can see how procrastination really does cost us. It really does inhibit our own personal potential. But I want to add something. This is a really fundamental shift. Really, where procrastination is most dangerous has nothing to do with the areas of procrastination that we normally think of. Most of the time when we're thinking about procrastination, we're thinking about things that we want to do. This project, this conversation, this habit, getting rid of this habit. We're procrastinating on all these doings. The most dangerous form of procrastination isn't what we do. The most dangerous form of procrastination is when we procrastinate our being. When we procrastinate what's really most important, which is who we are and who we're becoming. As we've already talked about, we tend to procrastinate on the most important things. And when you look back on your life, what's going to matter most isn't what you did. It's going to be what you became and how you showed up on a day-to-day basis. Now, chances are there are aspects of your life right now on a being and becoming level where you are holding back. You already know that there's a potentiality in you, and yet you're afraid to let that come to bear. Why? Because it's really important. There's no way around fear. There's only through fear. And that's why procrastination is always going to be a marker on your path as long as you are growing. Because as long as you are growing, as long as you are moving into a more potent version of yourself, you're going to be moving from phase to phase of unknown. This is the great invitation. And it's not even predominantly about us. Focusing on yourself is not really that strong of an energy to counteract that fear. But when you shift that energy and think about others, that's where the real magic happens. Your own becoming isn't just about you. When you're procrastinating on the version of yourself that could be one of the greatest gifts to all the people you love in your life. Now, I want to close with a few quick strategies so you can have some takeaways in terms of how you might be able to navigate procrastination in a more practical way. This is not something that's going to go away. It's going to be there. It's actually the marker that you're moving towards a fuller life. So when it comes to procrastination, the first thing you can do is to keep turning towards reality. What I mean by that is create accountabilities, write down goals, write down what your intentions are, write down even what you're planning to do on a particular day, write down commitments that you make to yourself, write down as many things as you can to create concrete steps, Not necessarily so that you can look back or be more efficient. The goal here is to be able to recognize what you're really doing and what you're not doing. In abstraction, we can all feel like, yeah, I'm progressing, or I'm doing this, or I'm having the conversations I should have, or I'm turning towards the things that are important. We need to be in touch with reality, what's really going on in our lives. The second is learn to sit with the tension. Whenever fear comes up, when discomfort comes up, don't turn away from it. Sit with it. Allow it to be there. Again, with the example of maybe a relationship where it's having a difficult conversation, we can feel like, oh, I don't really want to have that. But what ends up happening is we put that up for so long. What is the real cost of that? Discomfort is often just like a toll road. Like you pay the toll and then you get to go free down the road. Whereas instead, a lot of times we'll avoid the discomfort, avoid the difficult conversations, avoid the difficult work. And what ends up happening is we just keep paying over and over and over and over again. So don't move away from the discomfort. Another thing is pay attention to what inspires you. There's so many voices coming at us, and a lot of them are really negative. They paint a very negative depiction of what the world is like, what we are like, what the future is like. That stuff impacts us. People who want to move against the current of fear in their life need to fill their life with positive voices. It's not even an option. You won't be able to move against the fear unless you have a lot of positive influence in your life, a lot of positive voices. This is extremely practical. And to the degree that you're taking more risks will be the degree to which you need to inspire yourself even more and more. There's nothing cheesy or hokey about this. This is just a very practical step. You have to fill yourself with good things. If you're feeling afraid and you're allowing more fear to come in, you can't expect that you're going to be able to go and make progress. Another practical recommendation I highly recommend is finding some sort of community. It could be a spouse, a good friend, it could be a group of friends, it could be someone in a community group, in a church group, in a work group, whatever it is, people that have shared values with you, who are as serious as you are about growing in a particular direction. Because things feel even scarier when we feel like we're facing them alone. If you came across a bear in the woods and you were the only person there, that'd be really frightening. And truthfully, it would be frightening even if you had other people with you, but it would feel different. And you'd maybe feel a little bit better because you'd realize, hey, we're in this together. So finding this community, feeling like you're not alone, is so important. And lastly, focus on others. When you're feeling fear, take that fear and redirect it. Become more afraid of what it's going to cost you to not act than what it's going to cost you to act. And realize that, yes, although some of these things can be difficult, you never want to buy comfort at the expense of personal mission. So if you can keep your mind and your eyes focused on the good that can be created for yourself, for those you love, for the broader community, you're going to be able to engage and face fear in a way that very, very few people can.